Good afternoon, everyone. Fantastic to see everyone here, both in Aula at the International Institute for Industrial Environmental Economics at Lund University, and online, wherever you are, people in the universe. We had 180 participants joining us online, so that's fantastic, and we have 35 people here in the house. That's amazing. And the reason we're gathered here today is to talk about rethinking prosperity, the business and welfare in post-growth economy. My name is Oksana Mont. I'm a professor here at the Institute in Sustainable Consumption Governance, and I'm very interested in the topic of post-growth. And together with me here today is...
My name is Patrick Elf. I'm a senior research fellow at CEDAR, Middlesex University, London, and CUSP, the Centre of the Understanding of Sustainable Prosperity at the University of Surrey. So I think I will speak a little bit about why we're actually doing this event. And at CUSP, we speak a lot about Robert Kennedy, or Bobby Kennedy, who said not long ago, you would think, but 55 years ago, that even if we act to raise material poverty, there is another greater task. It is to confront the poverty of satisfaction, purpose, and dignity that afflicts us all. Too much and for too long, we seem to have surrendered personal excellence and community values in the mere accumulation of material things. GDP measures everything except that which makes life worthwhile. So, time is up in a way, you know. We're discussing these questions for many years, but we haven't really come very far. And we argue that we live in very decisive times, and we have to accelerate. We have to accelerate a transition to something that is more sustainable. So, with this event, we really hope to bring practitioners together with, academics and really discuss these questions in a way that hopefully allows us to make progress. And Oksana will talk a little bit more about the event, but before we go there, can I just say that on the left and the right of the room, there will be post-it notes, okay? So what we would like you to do, the in-person participants in the coffee break, in Fika, have a look at the whiteboard here, and you will find some main barriers and some solutions to overcoming these barriers. So please note down what you feel, are the main barriers and opportunities to overcome them. You can do that while during Fika, but you can also do that afterwards, once you had a chance to listen to everything, okay? In that context, we're not allowed to eat in this room, okay? Just so you know. So there is amazing apple pie outside, but don't bring it in, please. We still want you to come up with the main barriers. But if you do that during lunch, during the coffee break, or afterwards, that's up to you. Oksana, over to you. I think you will talk us briefly through our agenda today.
Right. We have a very busy schedule, but very exciting, we hope. So we have first 5 researchers who will be speaking for 10 minutes each, and then we will have quick Q&A session after each presentation. So if there are something that you didn't understand, a term or a concept, please ask. Then, right after the presentation, otherwise we will have also a panel discussion. Then for people online in the Zoom world, there is a Q&A possibility. So whatever questions you have to presenters or to the audience, you are very welcome to write your questions there. And then also we have an opportunity so you can read others' questions and vote for most interesting questions. We have Josephine who will monitor the questions, and then we will have the opportunity to answer the most interesting of them. There is also a chat, and so for people in the house there is post-it notes, but for people online there is a chat function where you're very welcome to write identified barriers and also generate some solutions for how these barriers to post-growth can be overcome. I should also mention that this event is sponsored by a project we have in the house, MISTRA Sustainable Consumption, and we are very grateful because the whole hybrid element is paid by this project. Then we have also practicalities. We have 3 toilets outside of the room, And then also, in case something happens, we have exits, the main exit that you came through. And then there is a door right here to the left, which you can use in case there is something.
So there's no fire alarm planned. If a fire alarm goes off,
that's for real.
Don't panic, but, you know,
quickly leave the premises.
Brilliant.
And then the last thing for the presenters, we have a fantastic panel today, also in person and online. We will have 3 and 1 minute warning, at least for those who are in the room. I think that was it for today, or not for today, for this part, for the introductory part, and we will move to the main part of our presentations, and that will be me talking again. Sorry for that. So I was thinking that for the benefit of the audience here, a lot of students are here, and then also online. So I will start with a couple of slides talking about what is it actually post-growth, what do we define as post-growth, and why we are talking about it today. And then especially I will focus on the role of businesses in a post-growth society. So why are we talking about growth or GDP? First of all, GDP, we use it as the primary measure of progress in our society. And that is problematic because there we also measure disasters and wars. They always generate economic growth in other parts of the world to solve the issue. So this is problematic, and also the education and health sometimes is not counted in GDP. Then another problem, of course, is that the growth, we are living on a finite planet, but we want to achieve infinite growth. This is impossible, and this is linked to, of course, assimilating capacity of Earth resources and so on. And then the third problem with GDP as the measure of our success is that the benefits of the growth that we see now, they are not distributed among different levels of society, groups of society equally. So some benefit much more than the others. Some numbers say that 10% of population appropriate 52% of the income generated in our global economy. And then, of course, these injustices and the strive for economic growth, it also leads to that we abuse nature. We see environmental destruction in many parts of the world. We see loss of biodiversity. We see overshoot of planetary boundaries. If in 2009 we overshot on 3 planetary boundaries, and this year it's already 6. And then also the numbers up there show the loss of biodiversity in different parts of the world. So there is something wrong with our system. And then it's also wrong because our GDP is not really growing. If we look at in the past 10-15 years, the European economies, they're sort of stagnating. The GDP is actually fluctuating. So for people who are very scared or concerned about what is this thing we're talking about, post-growth or degrowth, this is a very sensitive issue. We are already there. We are in the steady state economy already. And since our welfare societies are dependent or built so to depend on the continuous economic growth, now is the right time we start asking how can we reformulate, shift our society, find a way to provide the same levels of welfare to all of us, but with an economy that is not dependent on continuous expansion. So if we look at the research, activist communities, what has been offered as solutions? Well, we're all familiar with the green growth. Proponents of this perspective believe that we can decouple growing GDP from environmental pollution through innovation, technological or socio-technical transformations, but the belief is that we can still continue growing our economies, and through efficiency savings we will be able to decouple from the environmental impact. And in some countries, for example, in Sweden and Germany, we see very weak absolute decoupling. But in majority of countries and around the world, and if we look at a longer period of time, we do not see really even a relative decoupling. So this is one perspective. Another perspective is then A-growth. Basically stands for agnostic to growth. And this perspective says that we should shift our focus from looking at growth and especially GDP as a primary focus and goal of our society, and instead shift focus on how can we provide well-being, prosperity or resilience in our societies and decouple these goals from environmental pollution. And then the last version or perspective is degrowth, proponents of which believe that we can decouple GDP from environmental impacts only by planned slowing down of European economies in this sense or developed economies and stabilizing them at a certain level. And if these approaches sound very scary, we already have policies that are trying to degrow or cancel out impactful activities. Like we have ban on short-haul flying, we have support for work time reduction, we have cities banning some different types of fuel vehicles and so on. In all these discussions, we have a missing actor, which is a business. Some activists and researchers advocating for growth or post-growth, they look either from macro perspective or from activist perspective, but there is a very important actor that is usually not part of these discussions, which is businesses. And we have looked a little bit at cooperatives, some benefit corporations or social enterprises, but not really into what can best businesses do. And for businesses as well, it might be difficult to translate these high-level concepts into very specific what can they do, what strategies they can look at. And I think one way is to translate is if we look at the strategies that we already discussed, which is efficiency or shift to different consumption categories or sufficiency. One can also look at principles of post-growth and growth. If growth looks at efficiency, post-growth looks at sufficiency. We need to translate from extraction to regeneration. We need to move from accumulation to distribution, from private ownership perhaps to commons, and then from control to a care economy. In this house, we've done a small study where we worked with sufficiency-oriented, self-proclaimed sufficiency-oriented fashion companies in France. And we asked them, how do they operationalize sufficiency and how do they approach growth and profit? And what we saw is that they work holistically with these approaches. They work with slower rhythms and long-term mindset, both with their suppliers and with customers. They really followed the principles of fairness, again, in their supply chains and with consumers in terms of pricing, in terms of communication. And they also involve and work a lot with customers because they say that sufficiency-oriented business models, the barrier is not money in itself, but the barrier is consumer attitudes and unawareness about the issues. If we look at profit, some of these companies are these were 7 companies. Some of them started as late as 2018. And so they are on break-even point of becoming self-sufficient. Some of them use a combination of revenues and external funding, but they're very specific in what kind of investors they choose. So they also look for investors who subscribe to ideas of sufficiency. And then also profit, some of them feel that too much profit is not good, so they're looking for ways to redistribute the profit. If we look for type of growth, only one of them says, no, we only have this many people, we can afford to have long-term relations with so many customers, so we do not grow. The rest of them choose to grow. Some of them combine organic growth, others seek for high levels of growth, but also they are saying that we as a company may not want to grow, but we want the ecosystems of like-minded companies to grow with us. And this is very important. So if we look back at the principles that I just announced, we saw some elements of sufficiency in their thinking. We saw examples of some distribution of resources and a lot of care they put in their relations with consumers and their supply chains. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. I think we have still a minute or two for questions. Are there any sort of urgent questions from the audience? For clarification, follow-up questions? Are there any questions online? That's good, we're in time.
Excellent.
Ooh. Perfect. So next we actually have Max Koch, also from Lund University, and Max's presentation will be on conceptualizing and researching degrowth transformations. Stage is all yours.
So, I do the white one to move around, or the
back and forth.
Back and forth, yeah. Right. Yeah, well, Max Koch here. I'm a professor of social policy and sustainability, and I'm leading interdisciplinary project here called Postgrowth Welfare Systems. But today I want to talk about a forthcoming book, which I have coming out in the spring, which I wrote together with Hubert Buch-Hansen from Denmark and Jana Nestorova from Finland. And I'm talking about a little bit of the theoretical approach of this book and of some of the empirical results that may or may not be of relevance for our topic here. I'm very happy to hear that you have Milena Büchs on next week here, because earlier, I mean, I've been grappling with these issues for a while now, as some of you may know, but with Milena, I've been writing about issues that have to do with complexity in post-growth transformation. So I'm a sociologist by trade, not an expert on businesses. But maybe some of the issues that we have been discussing and are now discussing in the new book may be also of interest for people of with a business interest. So 5 years ago or so, Milena and we said that in order for a post-growth society to emerge, actually a range of institutions would need to change in parallel and at similar speeds to avoid enemy and social exclusion. This is due to the fact that a range of institutions, not least the welfare state, have actually historically developed basically in a certain relationship to economic growth. And that is not the only. So the welfare state expanded in what economists sometimes refer to as the golden age of capitalism, which is actually the dirty age of capitalism. And the same is true for a range of other institutions, including the legal system, the university system, and another one. So this means if you change one of these interlinked systems, say the economic system that used to grow after the Second World War, this has implications for the others. So in order to avoid social exclusion, unemployment, etc., business breakdowns, this change has to be coordinated, planned, as degrowth says, but at the time, we couldn't come up with an example, an historical example where change of that caliber had been achieved under democratic circumstances. So we are faced with a massive challenge here in order to transition to a post-growth economy and society, given the complexity of changes that would need to be done. So I have been saying this for a while now, and then a few years ago, another collaborator, Hubert Buchansen, contacted me. Well, maybe we should work together. We did work together on particular issues on degrowth, but in a little bit more encompassing way on understanding what we call deep transformation. This is what we think is necessary in this part of the world. So we're advancing a social science theory of degrowth, which to our knowledge has not been tried so far, by combining critical realism, that is kind of the ontological, basically, point of departure and overall umbrella of the book, and combine that with heterodox political economy and Bourdieusian sociology. These are the three main points, but we also kind of discuss, for example, existential philosophy. And, we went back to Erich Fromm a few times also in the book, which also was a lot of fun. So rather than only saying these changes we are up against are incredibly complex and difficult, we are now trying to make a step further how they are actually complex and at what levels. So here we basically advance discussions on what critical realists call the planes of social being, which is the material transactions with nature, social interactions, the way we deal with each other. It can be based on the elbow or based on equals. Social structures, which can be more or less hierarchical, and also the inner being. There is also a kind of individual dimension in transformations. And if we are not totally wrong, the kind of bulk of contribution so far were on the first and third plane of social being. That is basically the nature-society transaction and the social structure. And we also advance necessary changes and coordinated changes at the way we interact with each other and basically the plane of the inner being. And then we look specifically at three sites of social practices to give you an idea how this transformation towards degrowth may evolve using business and the economy, civil society and the state. And here I have to say that I am not the expert on business. This is actually Jana Nesterova, who you may also invite. And if you look a bit at the content of the book, well, we look a bit at how the current society works. We discussing particular institutional forms of capitalist development using regulation theory, discuss how forms such as the commodity form, the money form, the state would need to change in order to kind of bring about the changes we would like to see. And we have a particular discussion on business, civil society and the state. And I thought I give you some of the empirical results if I have a few minutes left. Very often we stress in degrowth and also sustainable welfare discussions that we need to reorientate basically the whole direction of the economy. We need to redirect it towards, on the one hand, ecological ceilings, and on the other hand, so that certain planetary limits, as Oksana explained, are not even more exceeded. And on the other hand, a lot of people cannot satisfy their basic human needs at the moment, which is needed. We also need to implement social flaws. And then we have done a few Well, surveys recently about policies that basically can safeguard both. No? It's on the one hand about limiting things, and on the other hand of guaranteeing certain things. And if you look at it in a rather broad way, you find that limiting things is exceptionally unpopular in Sweden. Be it the introduction of a max income, be it the limitation of flights, or on meat consumption, people don't want to see that. On the other hand, generalizing the system of basic services and expanding that beyond what we have at the moment, which is care for young children and the elderly, towards example, to implementing social tariffs. That means that a certain amount of electricity and water would be supplied for free. This is very popular. Now I have to do this a little bit shorter. We can look at this in a bit more sociological advanced terms. And using a Bourdieusian methodology, you can find 7 types of people you find in Sweden. And the good news here is basically that there is only one group, which is what we call the fossil liberal group, that is skeptical to all kinds of dimensions of degrowth transformations on all planes of social being. But there's also one group, slightly bigger, almost 20%, which is open and positive to all this, which we call active sustainable welfare. All other people in Sweden are at least open to degrowth transformation at one plane of social being. And then I don't think I have time to go through that. We looked at that also from a needs perspective, and this is something I can now only recommend to do. That is basically carrying out citizen forums. Well, after all, it's the citizens that have to carry out the changes. And in a different project, we kind of discussed with people how basic human needs are at the moment satisfied, how people could see this happening in an utopian way, and how to get from A to B. And this actually, we see some kind of potential here. Also, when we think about the huge gaps between the quantitative results we have and the qualitative ones, the qualitative ones are very positive in many ways. But we would like to see this being implemented on a larger scale, as a larger than what you can do in a research project funded by the Swedish Energy Agency. So. Well, the book is coming out, as I said, in spring, and but it is based on a lot of already existing publications. You may want to look up some of them already now. Good news is the book is going to be in open access, but you have to wait for a few months. Thanks so much.
5 minutes.
All right. Any questions? Immediate questions? Yes, please, Matthias.
You briefly mentioned in the end that you see very different results in your qualitative research compared to your quantitative research, if I understand you correctly. And I interpret that so that the qualitative discussions with people show more interest and willingness to experiment or embrace degrowth or postgrowth compared to quantitative results. Do you have any explanation for that?
No, I think I didn't have the time to explain that in much detail. Our citizen forums were not selected based on a representative basis of the Swedish population. So the people who came to them, even though there were 11 different ones, and we tried to have a certain diversity there, these were people who were already interested in some of these issues. So you could expect some degree of interest, basically, in discussing these issues and having a certain, reflexivity and preparedness to change. Whilst, of course, in the surveys, we had a representative sample. What we did was we co-developed, basically, with the citizen forum, the suggestions, the eco-social policy suggestion, which we then put to the test of in the representative survey. And there you find, as I said, a lot of support for everything that has to do with guaranteeing social minimum standards, where I have to say not for basic income, but for everything else. And but people are very reluctant in limiting something, and we can basically only speculate where that is. We want to do more research into the rich, which I think is very important. A lot of research in this area has gone into basically the poorer brackets of the population, but the rich have an absolutely outsized ecological footprint. They have also political and economic means to basically influence public discourses, and this is something we would learn a little bit more on. And that may help us to understand also why people are so skeptical about that. So this celebrated trickle-down effect, that from neoclassical economics, you may criticize this from a lot of angles, but it seems to have a certain following. So the idea is, oh no, you don't do something about the rich because this may hurt the other people too at the end. I think this has a rather huge following, and we want to find out in more detail why that is.
Great. Thank you so much. And we are moving on.
Oksana, before you introduce our next speaker, may I just quickly say the event that Max referred to during his presentation next week with Milena Books, I think it's actually an in-person event happening in the UK. So I'm not sure if it's hybrid, okay? But no, all good. I just wanted to clarify that. Please consult the CUSP website. It's a PERC and CUSP event, so please have a look online. Cannot tell for sure if it's hybrid, okay? Just as a point of clarification.
Thank you. We have now a next speaker who is joining us online, and it's Jennifer Hinton. She's done work on the economy for people and planet, not for profit. Thanks for joining us, Jennifer. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Oksana and Patrick. So thank you for having me today. I'm based at Lund University, actually working in the same project as Max mentioned on post-growth welfare systems. And for the last 10 years or so, I've been working on an alternative economic model and theory for post-growth economy that addresses how markets and business not can or should change, but must change to allow for sustainable post-growth flourishing. So I'm going to dive in and starting my timer so I don't lose track. And let's see. Okay, so I'm going to start with a bold claim here. I'm also going to minimize my own video. That not-for-profit forms of business can systemically transform the economy for sustainability, and in particular for post-growth sustainability. And what do I mean by not-for-profit business? Well, most of us are used to thinking of businesses as for-profit. And the difference here, these are two different legal structures that business can be performed within. So, and these two different legal structures differ basically in terms of purpose, ownership, and investment. So for-profit forms of business that most of us are used to have a legal purpose of financial gain, so making their owners and investors a bit richer, or maybe a lot richer. And in service of that purpose, ownership is structured in terms of private financial rights. And that means that the private owners and investors have the right to receive the profit and assets of the business. And this means that investment can yield unlimited returns for perpetuity, for as long as the business is operating. So there's no limits. And actually, the idea is to make as much money as you can from these businesses, right? So that's the purpose of financial gain. Not-for-profit forms of business, and I distinguish some traditional nonprofits in terms of these are not-for-profit organizations that generate most or all of their revenue through selling goods and services as businesses. But the legal structure is quite different from for-profit in terms of their purpose has to be social benefit. They cannot have a financial gain purpose. And in order to achieve social benefit, their ownership is structured in terms of collective financial rights. So the thing to know here is that none of the profit, none of the assets can be privately distributed to private owners and investors. Instead, all of the resources, including all of the profit, have to be used by the business for their social benefit mission. And that means that there's very limited returns that investors can use, and investment is instead made not for a financial return on investment, but for social and or environmental returns on investment for society more broadly. And so just to make this a bit more concrete for you, there's a lot of diversity in not-for-profit businesses. If you start looking around your own community, you'll probably find that there are a lot more around you than you would have guessed. But here are some examples to sort of show the diversity. This is Homeground Real Estate, which is a not-for-profit real estate company in Australia. So they manage and sell properties, and all of the profit that they receive from doing those business activities go back to helping people who are facing homelessness, like this woman, Rachel, here. You can also find renewable energy cooperatives. There's even a not-for-profit cybersecurity company in the Netherlands, food production in Bangladesh, microloans also BRAC gives in Bangladesh. So that's just a really quick taste of what these kinds of businesses are and what they do. And of course, there are a lot more examples I could give, but I've only got 10 minutes to introduce a whole different economic model to you. And so the key takeaway here is that even though these businesses are inspirational, and I love looking at not-for-profit businesses and the kinds of impacts they have, but the reason I started looking at them in the first place is I was wondering how, what kind of sort of concrete viable alternative economic system we could actually have that is post-growth. And the key insight here is that dominant business structures in the economy drive system-wide dynamics. Now, in my doctoral thesis and an article I wrote called Fit for Purpose, you can find my systems analysis of the dynamics that I'm about to talk about, but I don't have the time to go through all of them here. But I'll just give you an overview. So if we think about a for-profit type of economy, like the economy we have today in most of the world, so imagine a market, an economy made up mostly of for-profit businesses that are legally set up to deliver private financial gain to their owners. And so when we look at this, we find that there are some inherent tendencies, some systemic dynamics that arise from this way of structuring economic activity. The first is that it tends to drive overconsumption, a culture of consumerism, and economic growth, because in order to deliver more profit to private owners, you're going to have to sell more and more stuff. And so that requires more consumption, and that's the engine of economic growth. But of course, as Oksana mentioned, all of this sales, all of this production and consumption has environmental impacts in terms of using resources and energy, and also putting out waste and pollution, and of course, driving the climate crisis. This kind of economy also tends to drive inequality, because you have a handful of business owners that are receiving the surplus of the system, and they accumulate that over time because the goal is financial gain, so that's what they do. At the same time, the profit motive creates an inherent incentive for businesses to keep wages as low as possible, because the lower the wages, the more profit. So these dual pressures of wealth accumulation by a handful of business owners and wage stagnation for workers drives the levels of inequality we're seeing. And then the last dynamic that I'll talk about today, and there's a couple more, is political capture. So there's also an inherent incentive. Oftentimes the proposals for these, the solutions for these problems that I just mentioned are, we need more taxes and regulations. But of course, the profit motive also creates an inherent incentive for businesses and their owners to influence policy in a way that is profitable for them. And so we see all of this lobbying against regulations and taxes that would protect people and planet. And that's an inherent tendency of a for-profit economy. Now, what about seeking private financial gain and social benefit, trying a triple bottom line, people, planet, profit thing? Well, what changes in this economy? It can slow down these destructive for-profit dynamics, but only to the extent that resources and the profit are used for social benefit rather than private financial gain. And a really important point that I want to make here is that this is often overlooked or ignored in discussions of triple bottom line approaches, is that there are trade-offs between social benefit and private financial gain. Most clearly in terms of, if you're a business, you only have so much profit at the end of the year. The more of that profit that you deliver to private financial owners, the less profit you'll have to put into social benefit. So there are contradictions and trade-offs directly there, not to mention that if you deliver that profit to private owners, then you're contributing to inequality. Now, this is the model that I've been developing for the last 10 years or so. We call it the not-for-profit world. And if you basically imagine a market economy made up only of those not-for-profit types of businesses that I showed you before. So all businesses in this economy are seeking only social benefits, no private financial gain, no private financial owners. Well, we would see a very different dynamics arising from this kind of, this way of organizing the economy. First of all, there would be more equality because there's no private financial owners receiving the profit of the system, and there's no inherent incentive to keep wages low in order to give more profit to the owners. We would see investment responding to social and environmental conditions because the market is made up of businesses that all are set up to pursue a social benefit mission, whether that is helping alleviate poverty or producing high quality sustainable food, or whatever the mission is, protecting forests. Let's see, I have 30 seconds left. Two more dynamics. It would also allow for less consumption and production in ways that the for-profit economy simply doesn't, because it is profit driven. So this actually would allow for degrowth and postgrowth and a lot of the other principles that we're hearing about today. And then lastly, sustainability interventions can actually be more effective compared to the for-profit economy, where there's an inherent incentive to fight regulations and taxes that we need for sustainability. The social benefit motive that's the heart of this type of economy aligns much better with those sustainability interventions. Last thing is that I see the not-for-profit economy as necessary but not sufficient. I don't see how the for-profit economy can ever be sustainable, degrowth or post-growth compatible. But we also need, it's not sufficient in terms, we also need strong democracy, a culture of sufficiency, circular economy, and ecological regeneration. And I'll just leave you with some nice images and say thank you. And that's where you can find the article with my systems analysis that describes all of this in more detail and with some evidence.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Jennifer. Some deep reflections are probably required after that. We have another 5 minutes, actually. We are on time. I love that. Are there any sort of immediate questions from the audience? Yes, please. Oops, sorry. Just 1 second.
Yes. Hello. Thank you for your talk. I wanted to ask specifically about your last point about not-for-profit businesses aligning, or my question is more of an opinion to you. Do they push regulation, or will they align with regulation because they will create a market that allows for regulation that reflects their not-for-profit vision?
I think that, we, in an ideal sort of transformation, and now we're talking more about like transformation pathways than the way that not-for-profit businesses are right now. But I think in an ideal sort of transformation from the for-profit economy to a not-for-profit economy, not-for-profit businesses could play and should play a very important role in pushing for those policies as well, and not just passively aligning with them, but actively also pushing for them.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions from the audience or perhaps online? Matthias, yes.
Hello. I have a question regarding the, I guess, entrepreneurial motivation that, or how you envision that in the not-for-profit businesses that you describe. Because I do understand, we briefly talked about, or it was mentioned today that they are cooperatives. And there I understand that you could have a kind of a less, or a more equally or entirely equally distributed profits can be distributed equally, and everybody who is within the corporation is kind of contributing and benefiting from it. If I understood you correctly, what you imagine is companies that actually produce benefit to a wider audience. And then what I'm wondering is, are you thinking or concerned about what that could potentially do to the motivational drive, for lack of a better term, to those that maybe those that build and develop the company, but then opposite to current logic will not be the ones that probably benefit the most from it? I hope I made myself clear.
Yeah, you did. And it's a big question that we could have a very long discussion about. So we only have a couple of minutes. And what I'll say is that these businesses already exist, right? I'm not talking about something theoretical. And so we already have examples of not-for-profit or entrepreneurs who are very happy to put in this work that benefits the wider society. Everybody should get paid a living wage in these companies. So that's and then there's all sorts of research that shows that after people feel a sense of financial security, money doesn't motivate them more after that. It's purpose that is a better motivator. So there's a lot of research there. One talk I can point you towards is Melanie Riebeck. She's the entrepreneur behind that cybersecurity company in the Netherlands. She gave a great TED talk that's gone kind of viral about post-growth business. And she talks there about her experience as a not-for-profit entrepreneur. And she's given all kinds of talks now, so you can look her up.
Thank you.
And I can only echo that. Melanie is amazing, so look her up. Next, we have Tobias Froese from, who's actually joining us from Berlin. Tobias is based at ESCP Europe Berlin, and his talk will be on how to put degrowth into practice. Tobias, stage is yours.
Thank you so much. 1 second. Let me share. Okay. Great. Yeah, thank you. As has been introduced, my name is Tobias Froese, and my presentation is on how to put degrowth into practice. And I will basically present a paper which has been published this year. So it's called Degrowth-Oriented Organizational Value Creation, a Systematic Literature Review of Case Studies. And in case you're interested, just write me an email and I'm happy to share it. And of course, I wrote it together with my co-authors, Markus Richter, Florian Hofmann, and Florian Lüdecke-Freund. So what is it about? First of all, just to clarify this, what we did is we took all the case studies, so studies of actual real-world organizations that we found and that are related to degrowth. And we analyzed those case studies to really make sure what we're writing and finding is related to kind of what is really happening in the world out there. And we analyzed those case studies using one common framework. So that's important to understand. So we always looked at, okay, what is the contextual problem that we find in relation to what the organizations are doing? And then what is the solution? So basically the organizational activities and their implications that kind of address these problems. And then we had this side view kind of, okay, and is it related to degrowth? So does it play into the core values of degrowth, which is, of course, ecological sustainability, it's local and global equality, and conviviality and participation. And by doing that, so always looking for the problem solution combination, we found these 39 patterns, these 39 problem solution combinations. And to give you an idea what it is about, here is one pattern, which is called sharing risks and responsibilities with consumers. So the problem that we're having is very often we have a mismatch between supply and demand, and for that reason also a lot of waste of resources. The reason being that we have very powerful intermediaries. So for example, big supermarket chains, and then on the other hand we have small farmers, for example coffee farmers, and they're very much dependent on these intermediaries. And the intermediaries, the supermarket chains, they can define, the prices, they can opt in or out the last second and so on. So they put the coffee farmers or whatever other business you might think of into very risky competition. Now, the solution here we find in degrowth-oriented organizations is that they kind of try to build a community with their consumers. So they agree on production plans and sharing the financial risk of production. So basically they come together and say, hey, what do we want to produce and consume for the next year? How much will it cost us? And so on and so forth. And then they collectively agree on it. And by doing so, they can avoid wasteful overproduction, and they can also better meet the needs of both sides. So the security and for the livelihoods of the producers and the eco-friendly supply of quality products for the consumers. And classic example are the community-based agriculture organizations. And yeah, that would be one pattern, one example. To quickly give you another example, there's also, or this is the pattern called sharing and developing knowledge openly. And here the problem is that we see a lot of centralization. So we have the companies which are specialized in certain areas. And of course, or that's the usual way to do it, they patent their knowledge and try to seek monopoly rents. And this hinders in a way this collective, continuous and sustainability oriented design process. And it might even lead to planned obsolescence, or involve it at least. So here the solution is to share and develop skills and competencies and knowledge in open communities. So classically it's online communities. And by that to kind of build on the wisdom of a potentially global crowd. One example we have here is the open source ecology, which is a set of 50 machines needed in the area of farming. So it's called the Global Village Construction Set. It's basically the design instructions you need to build the different machines. And then you have businesses around the world who take this design knowledge and actually build the machines locally. And of course, they also learn something while doing it, or adapt it to their very specific needs. And by that doing so, they learn something, and they can also feedback it into the open source ecology and improve it. So there's a constant development going on, which is very successful. So, and as I said, we found 39 of such patterns, such problem solution combinations with actual examples. And what we had to do then, of course, bring some order into it. And we found 7 pattern groups. So common themes, you could say. We have, for example, group 1, which is about overcoming economic growth dynamics, or group 7, which is about the democratic, purpose-driven, and transparent governance of an organization, or group 6, which is about shrinking, slowing, extending resource cycles. So of course you would find stuff like upcycling, repairing, and so on. And then for each of these 7 groups, we came up with one theoretical proposition. So if you look at group 2, that's where the first pattern that I presented to you, and it's the group for engaging consumers in sufficiency-oriented presumption. So we found that one key aspect is that degrowth-oriented value creation means that the provision of products and services and corresponding communication activities actively involve consumers. And by really involving the people, it's about conveying a sufficiency-oriented appreciation that everything organizations offer, from the coffee bean to the iPhone or whatever it is, it's really the crystallized form of very demanding social and material processes. So to create this appreciation by involving people. Then we have the group 5, which is open and decentral creativity. So from this group, we had the second pattern that I just presented. And in this group, it's about, or the idea is that degrowth-oriented value creation means that organizations make social and material technologies accessible and advance them through the wisdom of the crowd. So open provision and development of resources to decommodify the access to resources and then allow for their open, decentral, and generative use. And finally, I could also quickly present the proposition we have for the democratic, purpose-driven, and transparent governance, because this is really very important to many degrowth organizations to have this democratic approach. Yeah. So again, degrowth-oriented value creation means that through democratic, purpose-driven, transparent decision-making, and also valuation and communication, people are engaged to really recognize economic activities as deeply political, to appreciate the discussion, consensus building, and so on and so forth. So it makes it much more demanding, but also more democratic. So bringing it together, what did we find? We had the 39 patterns, we grouped them, and we found 7 propositions. And I think together this makes a very nice package. So the propositions can give organizations and also researchers orientation. What is it about? What are the values of degrowth-oriented value creation? Then we have the 7 groups accordingly that also help you to kind of cluster a bit. Okay, what are the different themes to look at? And of course, the 39 patterns, which are, first of all, inspiration. So of course, every organization has to look exactly at how could it implement these patterns, but I think they can, give very good inspiration. So altogether, I think we found a good package for inspiring degrowth-oriented organizational value creation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tobias. Fantastic work. Any questions about the patterns, the propositions? Do we have any questions online?
Rather for the former speakers, so we will bring them up in the discussion later.
Yes. Then maybe I can take the opportunity and ask you a question, Tobias. You just said that the democratic and transparent governance, and you did mention that it might be demanding. Mm-hmm. Could you elaborate on that, please?
Yeah, sure. So even from a personal experience or what an entrepreneur has told me, so he tried to involve his employees more into decision making, and of course it means for the employees that, let's say, they're normally delivering the products or stuff like that. Now they have to get an idea of the overall business so that they can take part in, you know, certain governance decisions. And of course, it's much more demanding for them. And if you as a employee are really doing it to kind of just, you know, 9 to 5, I want to make my money and I kind of want to get out of it as fast as possible, then of course it really needs a cultural change. And secondly, of course, much more people are involved in decision making, which can then also take longer. However, what I also get as a feedback is that once you have developed kind of culture of, you know, making democratic decisions and people are involved, then the decisions that you come up with, you can be so much more sure of, you know, having the support of your employees, of your whole organization to kind of, you know, really work for it together, that it can in the end also have many positive effects. But of course you need to kind of get there, and it's demanding to get there.
We still have a little bit of time. Yes, please.
Hello, I have a question. So there was 39 patterns or 7 groups. Is there one to start with, for example, if you want to start a journey to implement, or do you need to do all of them at the same time?
That's a great question. Thank you so much. So the way I see it is you don't have to do it all directly and all at once. So of course, you can look at, you know, the 7 groups. They give you an idea, okay, what are the different topics? And you might say, okay, I think for us, we're producing companies, so let's go first into the area of slowing down the resource consumption and, you know, recycling and so on, and start from there. And you can then, you know, gradually build up. And I think there's also much more patterns that might be related to degrowth that we haven't found yet. Still, I think while I could never draw a clear line. I think to really become something that you might call a degrowth organization, of course, depends on your values and your purpose and so on and so forth. But it's not done. You're not a degrowth organization if you have like one of the patterns and all the rest you're doing is kind of classic pro-growth or, you know, pro-profit-oriented kind of doing business. So I think the more patterns you kind of start to integrate, the closer you get to becoming a degrowth organization. But you can always start somewhere and then kind of work your way up.
Thank you. All right, we are quickly moving on to our last presentation before coffee break. And we have in-house Patrick Elf, who will be talking about an imperative of responsibility. Please, Patrick.
Thank you. Yes, yours. Fully aware that I stand between you and the coffee break, so I'll try to make it worthwhile. It's not coming up, I think. Thank you. I would like to speak a little bit about a study that we did over the last couple of years. It was a study that's part of the Rethinking Fashion Design Entrepreneurship project, or Fostering Sustainable Practices, together with the University of Arts London and the Open University in the UK. It's based on a forthcoming paper, which is called Beyond Novelty and Growth, a Virtue Ethics Inquiry into Fashion Entrepreneurs' Responsible and Harmonizing Practices Towards Sustainability. We are really good at coming up with catchy titles, I know. It's a paper that's led by my colleague Andreas Werner, together with Fergus Line and Ian Vickers. And in that study, we basically interviewed over the course of, I think, 3 years almost, 27 UK-based fashion SMEs. And all in all, that led us to really have a good, rich data set of 80 interviews. And to analyze that really rich data set, we came up with an analytical framework. And I do apologize, it's a bit small, but I hope you can read it all right. I'm not going to delve into every single bit of the framework here. What is important to understand is it's a combination of Alistair McIntyre's virtue ethics scheme and Hans Jonas's imperative of responsibility. And I will talk a little bit more about the latter in a moment. What's here important to understand is that virtues are acquired human qualities that involve a characteristic motivation to produce a certain desired and reliable success, reliable success in bringing about that end. Okay. The other thing, another key element of McIntyre's scheme is really the quest. You know, that we as humans hold. That our human life is a journey and in the search of the good, okay? Whatever that is, in a way. The second part is really about Hans Jonas. He wrote a very interesting book in 1985, if I'm not mistaken, 84, sorry. And in that book, he presents an imperative of responsibility. And he argues that responsibility is a correlate of power, so that the scope and kind of power really determines the scope and kind of responsibility that we have in society, but also as individuals. And if you think about it, it's very different to what our dear friend Milton Friedman argued, that the only responsibility of business especially is really to increase its profit. I'm not trying to pick you on business at all, not at all. But it's more about the contrast between the responsibilities that we perceive and how we live up to them. So, taken together, that framework really enabled us to identify the virtues on the one hand that these fashion entrepreneurs showed in our study, and really how they live up to the responsibility. Again, it's a little bit of a whistle-stop tour, so I can't really delve into the data per se. But what is important to understand is that what they showed is that there is a growth for impact strategy. So some of the businesses showed a growth for impact strategy. What do we mean by that? They really want to grow in order to take away market share from less sustainable businesses. Okay. The other strategy was growth of impact. So a strategy that followed. They didn't necessarily want to grow as a company, as an entity, but they wanted to grow their impact through different ways. Sometimes they tried to reach out to consumers to provide them with awareness-raising material, to really enable them and engage with them and empower them as well to drive the change. So they deliberately kept small, but tried to grow their impact. And that actually came about through another thing that term that we coined, the extended consumer eco-engagement. We published an article a year earlier in Business Strategy and the Environment where we introduced that term. It really shows how these businesses interact with their consumers, but also with other businesses, to come together, to learn from one another, to again grow their impacts and not the company per se. Then, what we found is, in terms of key virtues, okay, there are many virtues, but we've identified 5 key virtues. The first one is really a passionate commitment. The second one is authenticity. The third one is humility. The fourth, sharing and empowering, and I already touched on that. And the last one is temperance. And especially temperance was quite interesting for us because it really embodies what I just tried to explain, you know. It really includes the notion of self-regulation and of self-restraint. So that at some point they said, like, no, I don't want to grow any further because I know that it increases the probability that the quality of our products and services actually decreases. And then we have to come up with a scale that where we can't control that quality and the sustainability of our products anymore. So where does it leave us? I think the first thing to mention really is that I'm fortunate enough to work not only with small and medium enterprises, I also work with big businesses, and I see these virtues also there in these businesses. So the question then is really, how can we inject the temperance as a post-growth virtue into business and management thinking? How can we actually really bring that into the thinking of decision makers to say, like, okay, we need to redefine our role in society. We don't need to grow any further, but we need to grow our impact, our positive impact. The second thing is that, some of you might be familiar with that. Small is beautiful, but again, the world consists of many big businesses. And also, small businesses it doesn't necessarily mean that there's less complexity. And I really like that also Jennifer alluded to that in her presentation. And I was lucky enough to have a conversation with her earlier this week where we discussed a little bit of system thinking. And what is interesting here is that the virtues that we identified in our study, they actually are very aligned with the last chapter of that fantastic book. If you haven't read it, go buy it, read it again, and reread it again. Because in her last chapter, these virtues that we identified, they are really aligned with the system thinking capabilities that Donella Meadows also identifies in her work. So it is interesting to see that, because these small businesses, as I mentioned, they don't necessarily want to grow in size, but they want to grow their impact and reaching out to others and understanding where they have these leverage points to change the system. That is complexity, and embracing that complexity, that really resonated with me in our study. Lastly, I just want to repeat that in a way, because with size and influence comes greater responsibility. And that is a beautiful insight that Hans Jonas taught me in a way. And if anything, that study, I think, is really a call for self-reflection, to understand, yet again, our roles and responsibilities in our jobs and in society more widely. And I just want to make that very clear here. I'm honestly not picking on policymakers and on business alone, because I think that also very much accounts for us academics. And there's something that I stumbled upon earlier this week, and you probably know him, Tim Parikh, also at Lund University. We have a lot of people in the audience who work with him, who know him. It's very difficult to read, but he tweeted something on... tweeted? Is it still called tweeting? I don't know. Xing? Gosh, different topic. But he basically said, so why do we, as academics, as public-funded scholars, willingly give away intellectual property over our research to corporate journals who profit from restricting access to knowledge? And I think that is an important point, because, yeah, we're here in that setting, and we're discussing also the role of businesses as academics, you know, and what they can do better. But we also need to self-reflect our role in the wider thing. So yet again, it is also a call for self-reflection in a way. So I'm not sure if I'm overrunning or not, but if you want to find out more about our work, please, there are good resources. CUSP, the website. I would also really briefly like to mention the MEND network. It's a small but really relevant network of so-called management educators navigating degrowth. It's a small group growing. For those of you who are interested, please, reach out. And obviously, there's so many good resources on the IIIEE website and MISTRA as well. So I'd stop here because I know that the apple pie is waiting. Are there any sort of questions?
Any questions?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we have. Excellent.
Thank you. I have a question about where I found quite interesting the growth strategies that you mentioned and the term that you guys coined with the extended consumer responsibility, or
good extended consumer eco.
Well, in this realm, I was wondering. I think the link towards a company that produces a good seems relevant or easy to digest, but I'm curious to know if this would be replicable in a services system, or even to the TweetX, whatever that was just mentioned, about how when it relates to intellectual property, like how do you draw the line, or how do these growth strategies actually apply in that case?
Wow, the second part of your question is a bit of tricky, and the first one, and I can tell you a little bit about how that came about in what we found in our study. So in our study, we really found that there are a lot of smaller businesses that sell products, right? But then they also try to make a transition into providing more services. So that is a fashion context. We had a few who actually try to develop better products that have a greater longevity, and then offer also services. So not to make the person consume more, but at the same time still have something, that generates a profit for them. So that interaction between services and goods was quite interesting. But I think you're sort of alluding to that. For services, it's quite difficult. It's much more difficult. The question with regards to probably more the academic sector, that is a tricky one. And I think that probably requires a little bit of a longer discussion. So careful not to say something wrong here. But I think it's a really good question, and yeah, more than happy to discuss it. Okay,
yeah,
for now.
Thank you.
I'm just trying to escape from that question.
I followed the conversation about, or following the principle of degrowth. Sometimes we have to still grow some parts of society in general, but for that we need to degrow others. I was wondering, in this context, when we talk about growth for impact and growth of impact, something about it doesn't sit very well with me, but I don't know exactly what. Maybe my question would be, do you see any danger in using the discourse of growth for or of impact to justify just growth per se, or the fact that companies might use this as a way of justifying still like the same use of resource or the same amount of waste and the same amount of marketing that they do, etc. Yeah. That maybe by degrowth in general they should just eliminate maybe parts of their production.
Brilliant question. I think one thing before I actually go to the question is, it's really important to understand that also that event here today is really focused on, let's say, the global north. Okay, so degrowth, for instance, is really relevant also in the context of emerging market economies, the global south. We haven't touched on that, and that's because we somewhere have to draw a line. Okay, so bear that in mind, because it's such an important question, and there are many countries that really need to grow in terms of infrastructure and all sorts of other things. Then, with regards to your question, yeah, I do see an issue there in a way, and I'm obviously not going to name any companies of our in our study, but I can tell you that from one company they thought about that very long, for 10 years, and then they brought in some investors very deliberately, slowly, and it helped them to grow their market share, to also take away market share from less sustainable alternatives, and it worked very well for a couple of years. But then they got to a point and somehow just continued snowballing into something they couldn't control anymore. And that is a bit difficult. So there is a threat to it. And I think that's also why these virtues are so important, because you have to maintain these virtues, that motivation to do the right thing, to show virtuous behaviors in a way. And that's another reason why I also really try to stress the importance of self-reflection in a way. So I'm not sure if that fully answers your question, but there is a threat that actually it just gets absorbed by what we sometimes refer to as capitalism in a way, or neoliberal capitalism, if you like. Does that make sense? Okay, thanks.
Then we take the opportunity to close the first part of this workshop. And for all of us here, there is coffee served with apple pie and vanilla sauce. And for people online, you have 25 minutes to grab your cup of coffee. But we all have some things to do during the coffee break. We cannot just go and do nothing or eat. So let's think about the barriers, what we've heard today. Maybe you thought about. If you have some brilliant ideas for how to overcome these barriers, please don't be shy. Come to the board, scribble on your post-note or post-it, or grab a pen and write up. And then the same for people online. Please use the chat for writing up listing your barriers and coming up with brilliant ideas for how to overcome them. We are back at 2:45 sharp. No academic quarters, and we have another set of brilliant speakers, and then we go in directly to a panel discussion. Thank you. It was really interesting. Welcome back. We've had a nice coffee and apple pie. I hope people online also had something nice and are ready for the second part of our workshop, where we have 4 presentations from different organizations who will give us their perspective on post-growth, how they relate to it.
Yes, our first speaker is Markus Feldthus from the Postgrowth guide. He unfortunately can't be here today because for those who are joining us online, it's actually quite stormy out there, and that's why he couldn't come over from Copenhagen. But we're delighted to have you, Markus, and yeah, floor is all yours.
Thank you. And hi everyone, and thank you, Patrick and Oksana, for inviting me. And I want to jump straight into it. And I want to start off by sharing some good news, because God knows there's plenty of bad news out there. So whenever there is a little bit of sunshine, we should share it with each other. And that is that Oscar, my co-founder, and I, what we're experiencing in the Postgrowth Guide is that a growing number of practitioners in businesses, they are starting to see that constraints on growth and size are not necessarily a bad thing. When done right, they can actually enable you to create a better business. So that's a positive image, which opens up for very different conversations around post-growth business. And I want to give two examples. First, what we're hearing is that big corporations, and we're talking some of the biggest in the world, they are reaching out to their consultants, partners, and saying, so now we have these sustainability targets that we were supposed to set up. We have all the data, all the reporting. We reap the low-hanging fruits, and now we can't reach the goals with our current commercial strategy. And I know that might sound like bad news, but in reality, what it is, they are realizing something that many already know, that green growth wasn't going to happen. So the positive news is that we're closer to having a real conversation about their limits to growth, because if they can't reach their targets, they're realizing that now. We can start to get into, okay, then what should we do about your commercial strategy? So that's one thing. A realization coming into the big corporations of the world. And secondly, the founders of startups that we're talking to, they want to do things differently. They're still a small minority, but still, they don't want to build a big unicorn. They don't want to get into venture capital funding. They don't want hypergrowth or the burnout that often follows with it. They want to create impact via open sourcing and so forth. There was even one that said, Markus, I don't want to be a not-for-profit, or I don't want to be a for-profit. I want to be a not-for-profit because I want to secure our employees and our customers even after us, the founding team, we're not here anymore. We want to remove that cash-out option. So what they are both experiencing, the big corporations and the founders, are that they are seeing there is a strength to constraints. Putting limits on growth or financial extraction or control could actually free them up to make better decisions. And that's really what Postgrowth Guide is all about, getting into that. So the agenda for today, our work, our challenges, and our solutions. And what I want to say is, or just highlight, is that this is now after the coffee break. So it's not I'm not a scientist or a researcher, though we try to base our work in Postgrowth Guide on good research. We are not that ourselves. We're not associated with a university. We're practitioners. So when we say, for example, that the market isn't ready yet, we are saying that from our own perspective. But what I will say is that we practice what we preach. So if something I say is wrong, I will be the first to know, and at least we'll go down together. So with that being said, let's dive in. I wanted to start out by just quickly explaining what is Postgrowth Guide. This is our front page, and we are for now a hybrid between a think tank and a consultancy, and we want to explore and teach how to build a non-capitalistic business in the pursuit of sustainability, and we'll get back to that. But for now, I also want to highlight that our main offering as of today is that we share 3 microbooks, publish 3 microbooks per month in our Open Hub, which is free and accessible for all. And what a microbook is, you can see, I don't know how much of it you can see, so I'm going to read out some of the titles. 39 degrowth business strategies based on Tobias Froese's research article. We took that, enriched it with some other case studies that we knew of. I don't want to say dumb it down, but we simplified it a bit to make it more accessible to the common business practitioner, or how green growth fails, or degrowth policies that can change the business world. So you can see there's a wide variety of the topics that we go into. And here's an example of what it could look on the inside of a microbook. It's a PDF of roughly 35 of those very lightweight pages, as you can see. 2 things that are worth taking away from this is that in this we use ourselves as an example. So we discuss resilience and how to build a war chest, and specifically how we plan to do it in Postgrowth Guide. And we keep it very lightweight. As you can see in the middle slide, there's not a lot of text on each page, easy to read, while we also dive very deep into details, as you can see on the page furthest to the right. These are actual calculations of 3 different scenarios for how we could build a war chest with different constraints to our growth and financing. So we publish 3 of these per month for now. And then I want to dive into our theory of change. So what do we want to achieve, and how do we want to achieve it? And our goal is to increase the share of not-for-profit businesses with limits to growth. Let's unpack that. First, you can see that we highlight not-for-profit. We build on Jennifer Hinton's work. I have to say I'm starstruck of just being in the same Zoom meeting as Jennifer Hinton. Your work is truly incredible. So we want to increase the share of not-for-profit businesses, and then we add with limits to growth. Because as I could also see, there was something in the chat about that. It's not necessarily enough to be a not-for-profit. There are still other, you could call them corruptible incentives. And I can mention a few. You can extract through wages, employee benefits. You can do it. You can grow to increase your own power, have more employees under you, or grow your business to such a size that you can influence politics, or that you have so much money in your fund that you can choose what to donate to and thereby influence what there is carried out of research, what associations thrive in a society, and so forth. So that's why we add limits to growth. And limits to growth is a very underexplored area. And we are doing what we can to dig out examples of this. Some of them are businesses that limit themselves to a location. That could be a building or a town. It could be the number of employees in a business. It could be products produced per year and so forth. There are many options. The important thing is that it is something that is meaningful as a heuristic for a business. So that's our goal, to increase the share of those kind of companies, because our belief is that this will help us all in the bigger scheme of things to live within planetary and social boundaries. So how do we want to do that? And I'll speed up a bit now. We want to put positive pressure on business decision makers. And in other words, we want to give them FOMO, the fear of missing out. That's the shortest way of saying it. And we have 3 strategies for how to do that. But what is important to say is that we rely on the negative pressure, the critique coming from citizens, grassroots groups, and so forth. And we want to be sort of the positive counter pressure to that. First strategy out of 3 is to push positive case stories digitally on our own channels to inform and mobilize owners and practitioners. This is really the what of the strategy, to show them what can be done. Then we have the who of the strategy. So we are building an alliance with NGOs, experts who can help us make these transitions, especially within legal Trojan horses, as we like to call them. So groups of employees within larger businesses who want to create change from within, and then small business owners or startup owners who want to change. Because it's not enough just to say what to do. We need to create trust and real relations to the people who can make this happen. And then there is the how of the strategy, to actually enable them to make better decisions, to figure out a way forward when they are motivated to do so. That's why you can see the guides that I showed previously. That's an example of those. We're working on a digital course, we do workshops and so forth. And that's also to create lighthouse companies. So cases that can become famous in such a way that they can go into the mainstream media, because that's really a big part of what it means to put positive pressure on decision makers. And for all of this to happen, for us to play a part in this, it's a condition that we are an independent guide that can speak to both mainstream businesses and scholars and activists. We need to be incorruptible and practice what we preach, otherwise people won't listen to us. And just a quick status on where are we at with this. We launched this year, and I want to keep this brief. Awareness-wise, taking into consideration that we are such a young company and that we have had no marketing budget, the fact that we have reached almost 2 million views on LinkedIn, we're very happy about that. Something is right. And that has turned into 1,500 people subscribing to our Open Hub also is a good sign that people are interested in this. And even more so because that has led us to negotiations with 4 companies who wants to change, 2 Trojan horses and 2 startup founders. Not a lot of revenue, but that's fine. That was not the goal of 23. That's for next year, where we plan to become a self-sustaining business. But it's not a walk in the park at all. We have our challenges. Most importantly, the market isn't ready. We can't live off our work in Postgrowth Guide, and we cannot brute force this. We cannot cold call companies and say, you need to degrow, because you can imagine that conversation, right? They would just say you're nuts and then hang up. We need to be in a position where we can have them come to us. Legislation gives the wrong incentives. Polluters doesn't pay, or polluters don't pay. You're not punished for being greedy. It's very difficult, at least in Denmark, to become a not-for-profit business with a purpose lock. And there are many more examples. And third, there's a lack of good financing options. Most of them lead to very extractive hypergrowth scenarios. But that's no reason to give up. The market isn't ready. That's why we have built a business, or is on our way to building a business that can educate the market, so that we help create the market. The legislation isn't right. That's why we're building alliances with NGOs who are trying to change legislation. We can't live off Postgrowth Guide yet. There's not a lot of good financing options, so we self-finance. Oscar, my co-founder, and I, we have another business. So we work 50-50, 50% in the other business, 50% in Postgrowth Guide, while we explore the opportunity for grants and a potential investment from an evergreen fund. So, and I want to finish off with this favorite quote of mine. It's difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on his not understanding it, because really, we see this everywhere. And this is also a reminder to us why we focus on businesses in Postgrowth Guide, because changing businesses will unlock opportunities within consumption and politics, which would otherwise be impossible or very difficult because people's salary would depend on them not understanding post-growth. Thank you.
We are moving on directly to the next speaker, Andreas Anderholm Pedersen from GIAB, a small company outside Lund. Andreas, yes. The floor is yours. And the topic of your presentation is the purpose as a key to a sustainable business in a post-growth economy.
Thank you so much, Oksana and Patrick, for inviting me here. And yes, my name is Andreas Anderholm Pedersen. I work as a sustainability manager at GIAB. And I'm here today to talk about purpose as a key to a sustainable business in a post-growth economy. But first and foremost, we're a small company, so just a couple of words of who we are and what we do. We like to say that we work with circular economy in practice, and we do so by working with large-scale reuse. So last year, we prolonged the life of nearly 300,000 products, and we prolonged the life of products mainly towards the insurance industry in the Nordics. So we basically take care of damaged goods. They get sent to us, we repair them, and we then put them back onto the market through Returhuset, which is our own e-commerce website. And in some cases, we send these products back to the insurance taker. We also have another business area, which we call Recommerce. And here we take care of returns, damaged goods, or other types of products that basically falls out of the linear flows of products. We take care of them, repair when needed, and put them back on the market through Returhuset. We started our business 12 years ago, and we started our business with a purpose. The purpose of our business is to reduce resource extraction. And I think you're all probably aware of this. We're consuming a crazy amount of resources. So on a global level, about 2 times as much as the ecosystems can handle. Based on Swedish consumption, about 4 to 5 times as much as the ecosystems can handle. And we know that about 50% of our climate-related emissions comes exactly from this. 90% of our biodiversity losses comes exactly from this. So we need to lower our use of virgin resources. And this is exactly where practices such as circular economy comes in. So circular economy are different ways of pushing down this, the use of resources through reuse, through recycling, through designing products for a longer lifetime, through designing new business models and so forth. So this is our purpose, to push down the use of virgin resources. So as you can understand, we're a business driven by purpose, but how do we structure this work? How do we make sure that we continue to deliver on our purpose when we grow? So we've developed this pyramid structure for our internal work with 4 steps on how we, so that we can make sure that everything that we do aligns with our purpose. And what I'll do now is that I will go through these 4 steps with you. So the top of the pyramid is the effect that we give to the market. That is our purpose, to reduce resource extraction. But how do we make sure that we realize that? Well, we have another level, which is the goal level below that. And here we have our business goals. So we have one goal for each sustainable dimension. So we have one goal for economic sustainability, which covers the value that we put onto the market, the value that we give to our customers. We have an environmental goal that covers our own organization, so basically our emissions and how we are to deal with them. And we have a social sustainability goal, which covers the people that we are affecting, the people within our organization and outside our organization. So in order for us to say that we've reached our purpose, we deliver on our purpose, we need to say that we've delivered on our goals. But how do we say that? Well, for that, we need results. And one important thing here is this is the only level where we quantify things. So here we measure things, we make things concrete. So for instance, at the, on the economical goal, here we measure economic activity, we measure growth. So internally we're using, or we are viewing growth as a mean to an end. We need to grow in order to deliver on our purpose. And in the bottom is our business activity. So basically everything that we do, everything from sales to marketing to running our warehouse, our e-commerce website, working in the sustainability team. So what we're basically saying now is that no matter who you are or what you're doing at GIAB, everyone is contributing to our purpose, the top of the pyramid. We call this way of working sustainable capitalism, meaning that we can grow while at the same time contributing to a sustainable impact, putting down growth from the top of the pyramid to a mean to enable us to contribute more with our purpose to reduce resource extraction. And with this visualization, I would also like you to see the bottom of the pyramid as the restrictions that we have, the frame that we need to work within. We only have one planet, we have a set amount of resources. So a sustainable business is a business that keeps within this boundary, but also has a business offer that is in line with a positive impact on the surrounding environment. So why is purpose important for businesses? Well, first and foremost, it creates meaning beyond profitability. It sort of dethrones growth as the top of the pyramid and replaces it with purpose. And that purpose can differ, but I would argue that it's when you have purpose in a pyramid shape like this, it also creates direction. One example from our business is in our e-commerce area. We take care of returns from the e-commerce industry. So what we're basically doing is that we're creating extra revenue for e-commerce companies on products that they otherwise would have considered waste. So in a worst case scenario, we're just enabling them to continue their linear approach of just pushing out new products onto the market. We do not want that, because that is not in line with our purpose. So what we have decided to do is that we've established a third business area, which we call GIAB Consulting. So we have 4 business advisors or sustainability advisors who are working as a complement to all our other or our 2 other business areas, who are helping our customers, our company customers, in transforming their business into having the same purpose as ours, meaning working in a more circular way. And I was asked to name a few words about the main barriers towards a post-growth economy and what can be done to overcome this. And I heard this quote a couple of weeks back. It was actually in another context, but I think it fits really well in here. And the quote is that we have received the manual for Ludo, or Fia med knuff in Swedish, but the board game is still Monopoly. And I think this puts it really well that I think we all know what to do in order to create the sustainable future. We have this vision in how we can create the post-growth economy, but the game is rigged. It's still Monopoly, right? And we feel that as well in our business. We are listed on the stock exchange, and on the stock exchange you get evaluated by one thing only. So I would argue that what we need to do is to dethrone growth, and we need to replace that with another purpose, and that purpose is us. And in the light of an ongoing climate crisis, that purpose includes creating the right conditions for us to flourish alongside blooming ecosystems. Thank you.
Thank you so much. As you probably know, we don't have Q&A time right afterwards, but we have a panel in a moment. And thank you so much, Andreas. That was fascinating. Especially love that quote. Also because if you think about it, monopoly was actually invented as a capitalist critique, and in the first place. But yeah, as a side note. Next we have Reid from Oatly. And yeah, you also have 10 minutes. You have the 3-minute warning, 1-minute warning, and then
Great.
Stage is yours.
So 10 minutes. I often speak quite fast, so I'm going to try and keep it slow, but try and share as much as I can. I was reflecting earlier, I mean, I've learned so much listening to all the research, but what I've also learned is that in the corporate world, we use less words and more pictures. So you're going to not see many words, but you're going to see a lot of pictures. So Oatly, hopefully everyone knows of the company. My name's Reid. I'm Sustainable Director there. And I was sitting here reflecting, okay, Oatly, how does Oatly fit into a post-growth world? We are a company that wants to grow. So first, let's start about the food system. I want to give you some background. We are part of the food system, and also we as in a company, but of course, we as people, we all need to eat. So we all take part in the food system. Many people, including myself, before I actually started in the food sector, wasn't actually aware of how big the impact of the food sector is. So I always want to just emphasize 1/3 of all global greenhouse gas emissions come from the food sector, or the food system, I should say. Half of those are connected to the animal-based sector. And just to convince you, because that's not the part of this, presentation, but the animal-based sector uses a huge amount of resources in terms of land. It doesn't actually contribute many calories to what we need to eat. And even protein for those meat and dairy-loving consumers, more protein comes today from plant-based foods and not animal-based foods. So the food system is broken from a sustainability or an environmental perspective. It is also not meeting our nutritional needs today. Either in some parts of the world, it's driving diseases such as obesity and heart diseases, and in other parts of the world, we still see malnutrition. So really, I just want to kind of say from a food system perspective, we are totally stretching natural resources. We're not meeting the nutritional needs of our planet today. We urgently need to transform. This is clear. It's very clear from reports like the IPCC. It's not just me standing here and saying this. And what's very clear is that not only do members in the supply chains of the food system need to take action, but it's very clear from all reports that we need to also see change in from how we eat and the diets what we eat. So we need to switch to more plant-based diets. So that's where Oatly comes in. So we exist to make it easy for people to eat better and live healthier lives without recklessly taxing the planet's resources in the process. And this is where I think we start to kind of connect to, are we part of this post-growth we want to see? So at Oatly, we are a purpose-led company, as we just heard also as GIAB is. And so at Oatly, our core business and sustainability are actually one and the same story. So we want to become a once-in-a-generation company that leads a global movement to reduce cow's milk by half. And that's where I saw when I was asked, would you like to come and do a talk connected to post-growth economy? I was like, I think that's where Oatly plays a role. Because yes, we do want to continue to grow, but we want to continue to grow by converting people from consuming very environmentally damaging cow's milk into something that is less damaging from an environmental perspective. So that is our whole mission, that is our purpose, and that drives us as a company and everyone in the company. So replacing as much cows-based dairy as possible with Oatly reduces the climate impact of dairy and the food sector. That is the result we want to see. Now, I don't actually have more slides. This is the last one. And it's not to sort of shout out about our marketing, although we do have some pretty cool branding out there. But firstly, I wanted to just discuss a couple of things before I get to the barriers that I was asked to mention. At Oatly, we want to drive this conversion because that's the positive impact we think we can have. And how we do that? For us, it's about, of course, putting products on the market that are equal or better than milk from a taste perspective, because you don't get people to convert to something by giving them something that tastes yucky. So that's our first step. The second one is just being a cool and fun brand. Milk is not cool or trendy. I don't know if anyone thinks that, but generally it's not. Oatly wanted to kind of become quite cool and trendy. I don't know if they're the right words, but to make people sort of start to think that not only when you make changes, they're not sacrifices, you're removing something delicious and maybe something quite fun. And that's where our branding, I think, comes in. But also I wanted to bring into, we want to bring awareness to people. So back in 2019, we started doing product carbon footprint labeling on all packs. And that was really to start to bring awareness to people that everything we consume, everything you choose has a footprint. And we wanted to sort of bring that awareness. But we've also also been calling for mandatory footprints on all food and drink in all markets since then, because we want people to be able to compare all food and drink. We're not saying you need to become vegan, but we want people to understand food has an impact and to be able to sort of make conscious choices of the food you eat from a planetary perspective as well as from a health perspective, because today you can compare the health. And we also challenge outdated rules and regulations, and that actually comes to the barriers. Because for any company in this space where we want to sort of drive this change to more plant-based eating, and that's our purpose, reducing the impact from the food system, there are a lot of regulatory and policy barriers out there. Right now, there's everything from taxes, where plant-based foods are taxed significantly higher than the dairy equivalents, which is really strange when sort of the European Union often sets tax frames and incentives and policies where they want to get to sort of net zero, but they're also really supporting destructive industries, continue to do. So we need to get at least a level playing field when it comes to driving this change, if not actually steer it so it's more in favor of less harmful options. So that's one thing we really advocate for. We also advocate for, we need to see change out there in terms of how food is presented, access to it, like in public procurement policies, in schools. There is still a lot of kind of meat and dairy, and we need to sort of see the shift. So we need to, not Oatly, I mean we, society, these are the barriers that are preventing this shift to a more sustainable food system. Other shifts as well, farmers. They're at the front line of climate change. They are the people that produce all the food we consume globally. They are not supported to have a transition to something that is more sustainable and less harmful. And so how can we move into a post-growth society without supporting the stakeholders that really need to be part of that transition? So there needs to be money put up from a policy perspective, from a governmental perspective, to support farmers to switch from the way they are farming today, which is so destructive, to a more sustainable way of doing that. And then finally, you also mentioned it, Oatly is also on the stock market. We went on the stock market because we needed money to grow. Coming back to, we want to grow because we want to drive degrowth of the dairy industry. So we are part of the kind of current financial system. And hey, I'm sustainability, I'm not finance, so I don't really completely understand it all. But of course, the traditional investors, they want growth, they want profit. So that, of course, is how do we address that challenge that the sort of financial sector is set up to expect profit and growth. So I think that was everything. Oh, there's already a hand up. I don't know if we're meant to do questions, but I think so. I think I spoke so fast, we probably have a few minutes. Sorry? Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. Like, our owners, our investors want profit. That is the system we're in. So we are a for-profit company. And that's what I'm saying. We are purpose-driven. We want to drive this change away from a very impactful industry to something that's less impactful. But at the same time, we have investors, we have owners that do want profit. So I'm just putting it there on the table. These, I think, they're challenges that face the world today. And how do we bring solutions to that? Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And now our last speaker, Hege Sæbjørnsen from INGKA, will be talking about circular IKEA.
Give you that. Excellent. I'm going to get myself some water first. Sorry about that. And did I just put the... No, there we are. Excellent, thank you. Really great to be here. I think it's fair to say that IKEA is probably like the ultimate paradox when it comes to both driving profit and purpose and talking about sustainable consumption. And I think it's really exciting to be in this role because it's a proper intellectual and practical challenge. And I think it also highlights and I'll talk a little bit about that towards the end, the type of approach, mindset, and skill set that's required to tackle these incredibly complex and paradoxical issues. My name is Hege. I work in the global sustainability team, INGKA Group, IKEA. as Global Circular Strategy Leader. I've been with IKEA for just over 8 years, used to head up sustainability in the UK and Ireland, as if it's over there, sorry. Coming over to Malmö about a week, a month at the moment, working in the global team. I want to just share a little bit about what we are doing, be quite practical about it, and also share a little bit about some of the practical barriers that we come up against in that doing, because it really is only in the doing and learning through taking action that any of this can be solved. And be really clear that there's a lot of learning and unlearning and reassessing in that process. I'm not going to rest on these, but just to give a bit of that macro context like you have seen and you're so familiar with. But it's fair to say, in the context of talking about IKEA, it's an 80-year-old company. So we are the perfect timeline for this accelerated growth paradigm of the linear economy and where capitalism and our society today has taken us, right? So this is what's happened. You'll have access and you know all of these data even better than I do. But of course, we know that this is no longer sustainable. And Oksana showed this slide too. And in this context, rather than share the update on the state of the climate, it's important to highlight that we are a resource-intensive business model. You know, we are not a Google or a technical company, tech company, or whatever else. We are reliant as a core part of our business model on natural resources. So we need to, and we have to make, you know, the future plans for what, if we want to be around in 80 years, it's not even just the right thing to do. It's not even a sustainability mindset thing to do. It's actually a survival thing to do at a societal and a business level. And this is sometimes a conversation that doesn't always kind of sit comfortably inside or outside the business. So being in Sweden, I would imagine if I asked the question, who owns something from IKEA in their home or where they grew up, maybe there's 100% sort of arms raised. I grew up in Norway, so also being kind of, it's something I grew up with. So it's also something really quite in like our DNA for many of us. And we are a purpose-led company. We have a vision, which is to create a better everyday life for the many people. And it's important also to highlight that, and this is important in the context of when companies are set up and what they're trying to respond to. When IKEA was created, it was a time when affordable, well-designed furniture was not available for the many. So there was a real social imperative to democratize quality furniture for the many to live better at home. That's quite a different reality today, particularly in the Nordics. And we're sitting very comfortably, right, most of us, in a part of the world that have, for the most part, although that's changing, what we need. And then sharing a little bit about, we've been on a journey for since 2012 with our sustainability strategy. We're currently in the process of revising what it truly means to become a circular business. We set that as an ambition already in 2018 to become a climate positive circular business, and also to mainstream sustainable and healthy living. And I haven't got that particular healthy and sustainable living up there because we're actually shifting the wording of the commitment so that we can measure it, which is a really important part of where we are today in terms of maturity. If we can't measure and can't scientifically and transparently verify how we are in fact delivering on our purpose and impact, it's nice rhetoric. So this is another part of this exciting and challenging part of the journey that we're on right now. So, a lot of information, but just I want to talk you through this in a bit of a structured way. So, this is our value chain in a nutshell. We've gone from a linear way of thinking, right? A really successful model that has grown to the point where we are in a linear way. And now we're saying we're going to become a circular business. First of all, there is no external verifiable standard for what that truly means. Problem number one. It also in practice means that we're challenging the existing business model. We're also trying to re-engineer all the processes that we've perfected over 80 years. So imagine that you, in our case, global value chain, hyper efficient to bring prices down in order to optimize the use of resources. We're suddenly saying we're going to distribute that, we're going to break that down, and we're going to also make that equally a successful business. That's what we're trying to achieve, which is not quite straightforward. But if you start at the beginning, so it has to start with the materials and design of products. So this is just me talking you through where we are today. We made a commitment to design all our products with what we call circular capabilities. They're open source. You might be familiar with them. It includes things like design for disassembly, reassembly, recyclability, adaptability. But that's about 12,500 products across all home categories with multiple components. So that in itself is a huge undertaking. But nevertheless, that's happening. And all products need to be designed with recycled and renewable materials. Now, many people today, internally in the business as well, will make the assumption that if we just do that and then recycle stuff at the end, we will be a circular business. Of course, that's not the case. And that is also part of challenge number 2, to actually update and upgrade how we define and understand what becoming a circular business truly means. And I will skip the waste part, because that's pretty self-explanatory. But when you look at then the reuse part, the repair, the reuse from a peer-to-peer dimension, imagine this whole flow as a retailer of the role we play on extending the life of the products. And that's not just a service, it's not just a component, it's the whole ecosystem of different solutions that together create an offer, if you like. And all of these have to be done individually, tested in different markets. We've perfected, and you can hear some of the challenges in the background, a solution that fits for 32 markets across different regions of the world. Now, with circularity, every market has different legislation. Every market has a different maturity around the customer desire, how they want to shop, what they want to shop. We did a research piece in London a few years back where became clear that the younger generation didn't feel comfortable holding a hammer anymore because they hadn't actually fixed anything in their entire life. And we thought we were going to offer repair services, realizing that's just not going to work. So it's a really kind of adaptive, localized, context-specific approach that we need to develop. Although, in total, this is something we're intending to become a sort of core circular offer of opportunities that can be scaled across the business. That is, in a way, where we just need to start, right? That's just like to normalize and scale and become part of the solution landscape of just like thinking long term, looking after what you've got and coming back to us. And then we also need to find, and this is where the growth paradigm comes in, we need to find ways to commercialize and at least articulate how these opportunities will add value to the business and the customer, right? So lots of dimensions. You'll get these slides later. We've tried lots of product design solutions, simple things like the wedge dowel that is really geeky and really small, but actually really exciting when simple technologies can help disassembly and reassembly. I'm going to go past this. No, actually, I'm not going to go past this. I'll go back to that. Coming back to this idea that we need to think holistically and in systems. So you're breaking down to understand the needs of the customer. So how are we going to be relevant for allowing customers to care for their products? What does it mean to pass those on when you no longer need them? Often I get challenged with the idea that can't you just sell solid furniture that lasts for 20 years? Yeah, sure, and we do. People just generally don't live like that anymore. You might work here or study here for a few years, and then you're passing your goods probably on to someone because you're moving to another country for a different job. So it's also about responding to the new behaviors of people. And that's what we're trying to do. Another example where the benefit of being a big company comes in, there are cons, and we've heard many of those. One of the benefits to our scale and our muscle is that we can invest in capacity to add capacity in society. This is an example called Retour Mattress. You can Google it. There's some stuff online about it. It's a mattress recycling facility in Holland. It was good business enough for us to invest, and the legislative landscape in Holland was favorable enough for actually us to invest in and develop a business around this. This is now a capacity that recycles the full 1.5 million mattresses that get thrown out every year in Holland. Mattress is one product, and I recognize that, but it's a product that everyone needs, and it's also a product that is recommended to be thrown out every 10 years. So you know that there's a stream of waste coming, so we can also invest beyond our business. Can you tell the slide that hasn't been professionalized? So on this one, and this is where I just want to sort of end my points and a couple of discussion points. Something to bear in mind, and I've reflected on this a lot, is that even if we are a private company, we don't have shareholders, even if we are purpose-driven, even if we do sell products that provide needs, it's still not the final solution, right? So actually scaling up and defining what people truly need, getting clear on what is the difference between needs and wants, like that's what we need you guys to define so that we can take that in and really base our approach on science, on research, and help us translate that into practice. And if you tell a CFO in a business to avoid selling stuff, you're just not going to get the reaction that you need. So we need to find ways to really address people's needs, understand the business value, and how we communicate and collaborate across sectors. Because every actor in the system will have a unique role. And as practitioners, I'll be honest with you, we have very little time to translate really complex concepts into practice. So this is where we need to collaborate and come together and find common solutions. Thank you.